Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the University of Rhode Island Foundation and Alumni Engagement and the Women's Leadership Council, I'd like to welcome you today. My name is Ann Weston, and I am a Senior Program Manager of Alumni Engagement. The Women in Leadership Speaker Series showcases the inspiring careers of highly successful and influential women and provides the opportunity to share their knowledge and experiences with students and alumni. Before we get started, I'd like to extend a special thank you to Lil O'Rourke, President of URI Foundation and Alumni Engagement, and Michelle Nada, Vice President for Alumni Engagement. Many thanks to the both of you for your support of this program and for joining us today. I'd also like to highlight the Women's Leadership Council. Led by a group of alumni volunteers, the URI Women's Leadership Council supports and enhances the personal and professional growth of URI women by cultivating meaningful opportunities to unite, celebrate, empower, and learn from each other while forming lasting connections and relationships in the community and beyond. Additionally, the Women's Leadership Council supports and promotes the Women Transforming Women Endowed Scholarship, a scholarship that is awarded each year to women-identified student who holds a leadership position and maintains a GPA of at least 3.0. Our program today will primarily be a question and answer style between our featured speaker, Christine Heenan, and our host, Mary Beth Riley McGreen. While you are listening to the program, please feel free to write your questions into the Q&A feature, and we'll spend some time at the end of the program to answer your questions. Please note that we may not be able to get to all the questions today. Now I'm excited to introduce our host, Mary Beth Riley McGreen. Since arriving at the university in 2017, Mary Beth's focus as a digital content strategist has been to create content that inspires high-achieving students to apply to the university, highlights the university's principal differentiators, positions it as a top-tier research institution with global reach, and elevates historically underrepresented voices. Additionally, she advises the university's colleges and departments on strategic thinking about their web content and produces creative briefs that guide their redesign projects. Mary Beth is committed to advancing the university's goals regarding equity and diversity and has completed diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, both as a staff member and as a student. She's also the author of 3 books on Rhode Island history. In her off hours, she mentors local high school students and runs a free creative writing group for teens. Mary Beth holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. Mary Beth, thank you for joining us today and for hosting this program. I'll now turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Anne. It is a thrill to interview Christine today. I think our audience is really going to enjoy hearing about her career. I know I am. I've been looking forward to this since I was asked to do it. And I'm so thrilled to introduce her. I am going to refer to notes because Christine's accomplishments are broad and many. So please welcome URI Trustee Christine Heenan. Christine is Chief Communications Officer and Executive Partner at Cambridge-based Flagship Pioneering and the founder of Clarendon Group, a communication strategy and social impact consulting firm. While at Clarendon, she advised many notable clients, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Whitehead Institute, the Social Science Research Foundation, and others. She has also held senior leadership positions at the Rockefeller Foundation and Harvard University, and was a White House senior policy analyst and speechwriter during the Clinton administration. She has taught at Brown University and Harvard College and served as a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center and an executive fellow at Harvard Business School. In addition to the URI Board of Trustees, she serves on the board of the David Rockefeller Fund. Christine, as I said, it's wonderful to have you here today. Welcome, and I look forward to the Q&A. But first, I would love for you to share a bit of your history and career accomplishments with the audience.
First of all, Mary Beth, thanks so much for agreeing to do this interview. You're just such a fabulous interviewer. I'm going to try to not be intimidated by the Billy Collinses and Tony Fauci's that also sit in your chair and do my best here. But I'm really thrilled to see you again. and to have this opportunity and to be with the URI community. It's been really meaningful being part of the board, and I'm happy to be here today. I'll be brief in terms of my own background. I moved a ton as a kid. I'm from Philadelphia originally, moved to Providence when I was in middle school, went to classical high school while my mom went to URI at night, and went on to be a journalism student at BU. My first kind of veer from my chosen path was to go to a business strategy consulting firm out of college. I had done some internship work in Japan and got an offer at a business strategy firm and figured I'd do that before going to the Patriot Ledger or the Warwick Beacon as a journalist and do a few years there. I ended up going from that role to the role at the White House as a senior policy analyst, then as a speechwriter. And after the White House, I wanted to come back to Rhode Island. I wanted to go to graduate school. I took a job at Brown to oversee their communications and government relations and programs, community relations as well. And got married, had my first son, stopped going to graduate school. And then when I had my second son, just wanted to work more flexibly. I know we'll talk about that later. And started my firm, Clarendon Group. And I worked there for a number of years, 8 years before then being recruited to Harvard as the Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications. I had an incredible run with an amazing boss and mentor, Drew Faust at Harvard, and then was recruited to go work with Melinda Gates, who at that time was setting up her own organization focused on gender equity and global development, alongside her work at the Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation had just recruited a new CEO, Sue Desmond-Hellman, so I went to work with the two of them, as well as with the education program at Gates, and did that along with other clients until I went to the Rockefeller Foundation and moved to New York later in the mid 2010s. And I was at Rockefeller until 2 years ago. I oversaw the Asia office, the Africa office, the Bellagio Center, their communications, program advocacy, and partnerships functions. It was an incredible role at a very storied institution. I learned a lot on the grant making side of philanthropy and a lot about content with an eye toward social impact. It was really an interesting chapter there. And I now, as you mentioned, am at Flagship Pioneering. My boss, Nubar Fayan, is the co-founder and chairman of Moderna. I was leading Clarendon after Rockefeller and was recruited to this role when Moderna was becoming a household name as a small biotech, and was just very compelled by my boss and the need for helping and chipping in, and here I am. So I'm now based in Cambridge, but spend whatever time I can not far from URI in Jamestown, Rhode Island.
Well, wonderful. So what I thought we would do is kind of look at your broad and varied experience from different kind of vantage points. And I thought I'd start with some career questions. You've had an awe-inspiring career in communications and strategy, and you've worked in multiple sectors. So higher education, public policy and advocacy, government. You mentioned, at the outset in your discussion that you didn't go the route that maybe other journalism majors did. What exactly drew you to more of still a communications role, but more of a strategy? Were you seeing something on the horizon about how we'd be communicating?
I think I'd love to say yes. I think I was young and opportunistic and kind of got on the bus that pulled up in front of me. But I would say that communications has always drawn me. I was a kid who kept a journal when I was, 5 and 6, and read the newspaper as a young kid, and was always drawn to journalism and storytelling. And I do think that first role in consulting, though, did introduce me to business strategy, to analysis, to presentation to audiences other than readers, in a way that I really benefited from career-wise.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that any decision that you made in those early years was pivotal to your success? Are you one to engage in kind of looking back and assessing and kind of teasing out from your life pivotal moments?
Yeah, I think one pivotal moment and one, I think, lesson for people who are early stage career is not being afraid to pivot and then pivot again. And I'll tell a specific story. I was working in business strategy consulting as a young person, living in Providence, traveling quite a bit for my job. And Jack Reed was elected to the 2nd Congressional District and offered me a job as his press secretary. And I got my head around the fact that I would love to be in Washington. I would love to be on either side of that microphone, and went to my boss and said, I've gotten this opportunity, I'm going to do this. And the conversation that ensued led to him saying, look, I think this is a better role for you. And I have 3 friends who are all running for president. And if one of them wins, I'll be going to Washington. So why don't we move you to Washington now and get some office space there? And that way you're there if this comes to pass and we go to the White House. And, you know, I always say Jack Reed got me to Washington because I didn't take the job. I had basically said I would accept the job and then agreed to this other path. And I remember being at the White House early on, and just the legions of resumes from smart press secretaries on the Hill, and I thought I'd be one of those people had I gone that route. And had I not had another year and a half under my belt doing business strategy, I might have presented differently, been less capable or qualified to be a policy analyst. So that's an example I would give of pivoting back toward my original career goals, but then seeing circumstances that presented themselves that allowed me to even rethink the rethink.
I'm just kind of still stuck on that you said no, that you had to then go and say no, and to feel, I mean, I think about, you know, some of the things that we as women can fall into in terms of, there's a lot of apologizing for all kinds of things that women shouldn't apologize for. I love that you had the presence and the you know, the basically the presence of mind to say, this is what is going to work for me, for my career, as opposed to maybe being like, well, I should do this, you know, I should do this thing because this is an important person. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of how women look at careers, how we should be looking at careers and trajectories?
There's a lot in what you said. One is just a discomfort in having difficult conversations, or conversations where you feel like you're going to disappoint someone. That's a really important skill to develop as you climb a leadership ladder. And the second is just over worrying the disappointment you might cause someone else. It's not something women like to do. I'm a firstborn. It's not something firstborn children like to do. But to sort of try to at least dial down those voices and say what's right in this moment. I'm sure I lost sleep over it. You know, then Congressman Reed was great about my thinking, which I walked him through. So he made that conversation and probably subsequent conversations easier because, you know, I had that conversation and the sun still came up the next day. And it was, but yes, I think that one of the things I learned, we're going to talk later about mentors, from a mentor of mine, the CEO of the Gates Foundation, Sue Desmond-Hellman, is that hard conversations don't mean that you're not nice. Don't mean that they have to be unkind conversations, right? I remember being in a meeting with Sue and someone raising this issue, and Sue was saying, yeah, we're not going to do that. And this is the last time we're going to have a conversation about that. Next. And it was like, wow, she was 100% clear. The annoyance of this thing that had come back up was clear in what she said, but not in how she said it.
Yeah.
And there was just no emotion around it, no anger or hostility, just like, let me be perfectly clear. We're not talking about this again. Next, with a smile that she meant, you know. And so I think difficulty or a barrier in having hard conversations where you have to give critical feedback to an employee, where you have to say no to a job, where you have to deliver tough news to a boss. You know, the earlier you learn those skills and separate yourself from the importance of being a straightforward, clear, helpful communicator in those moments, and that you can do so with humanity and kindness, that the news and the delivery are separate things. Those are really important skills, I think.
Yeah, I think we could stop now, and we have just had an amazing lesson in how to conduct ourselves, but there are many, many other questions that I have for you. We've kind of been circling around this, but did you ever get a piece of advice that you decided not to take, and that made all the difference, that you did not take?
Yeah, I think so. In 2018, I had this opportunity to go to work with the Gases and the foundation, and was told, if you want to make a difference here, it really means moving to Seattle. It really means moving to Seattle. And it was a time of transition in my own lives. My younger son was transitioning to a new high school. My older son was transitioning to college. And it just, the careerist in me that was getting the advice that this is the right way to succeed in this next step was really getting cross signals with just what felt right to do for me as a whole person and for those who I cared about being there for. Mm-hmm. And so I put off the move to Seattle and said, I'm going to do this for the next year, at least from here. And the distance that gave me allowed me to realize that I was going to be much more successful as a consultant to the foundation, giving them half my time and spending 1 week a month in Seattle than I might have been in a full-time role with all that was going on there at that time. And so that would be a piece of it. But and I can say on multiple levels, the decision to stay in New England around my friends and family, not being new at where I lived alongside with being new where I worked, was paid tremendous dividends just to my I think professionally, but also just to my mental health, to my physical health, to my community. You know, we're only as good as our ability to show up with a full tank. And I used to get in tussles all the time in scheduling meetings when I worked for President Faust at Harvard, because I'd always see an opportunity and say, oh, she should definitely do that talk at the Boston Public Library on Lincoln's birthday, and she knows everything about the Civil War. And my colleague Clayton Spencer, she's now the president of Bates College, she'd say, nope, it's the last 3-day weekend before commencement. She should go to the Cape and relax. And her argument was always protect the asset being the president. And thinking about her holistically was going to be the best thing for the university. And I think about that all the time. And so that's a case where I thought about protecting the asset that was myself and that which was important to me as a person, as opposed to the best trajectory in the near term for a career step. And I'm really glad I made that decision. That's fantastic. I love protect the asset too, because it's something that you that will stick with you. It's not something that and Mary Beth, it's so easy for women, right, to make everyone's doctor's appointment but theirs, to put off that 3 pages you just want to read in that novel before you go to bed because you've got that last little laundry to fold, or that. But if you think in yourself, this is not a selfish act. This is me protecting the asset that makes all this other stuff work, whether at work or at home. It just reframes it in a way that I think gives women permission to take care of themselves too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned mentors. I'm curious about mentors, and you've already mentioned one, who had a deep impact on you, and also your view of mentorship from a person who can be a mentor to someone else. So I have benefited so much from mentors, and I think it's funny because there are people who maybe didn't designate themselves as mentors, or I didn't at the time designate as mentors, but who I look back and say, watching Nancy Martin, who was a press secretary in the governor's office when I was an intern, as the only woman on the senior leadership team who had to have difficult conversations on a regular basis, watching her do so. Carol Rasco, who was my boss at the White House, who had a school-age daughter and a profoundly disabled son, who she integrated into her work life in the West Wing. And we would all go over for birthday parties for Hamp or Mary Margaret, and thinking, this is possible, you can do this. And then Drew Faust was just, every question you ask me about what I learned about leadership, I will probably invoke her, because I just, watching her in really difficult situations, watching her in situations where there was no we're going to upset a constituency on either side, which is just the nature of university leadership, or can be. It was a real pleasure and a learning experience. I also, though, have someone who at this stage of my life and career is my mentor, someone who I met, who's an alum at Harvard, who is just really good at advice giving. And I'm someone who is best off, mentorship. Finding the right mentor is like finding the right pair of shoes. Like it won't work for, what works for one person won't work for everyone. But for me, I like someone who's directive. No, that's not the right way to think about this. Here's how to do that. This is what, and so my mentor, Pug Winokur, he's a great listener, and he'll say, but he's unafraid to give directive advice. Someone who said, not my decision, up to you. I would think about this or that. Maybe wouldn't work as well for me as someone I trusted so much, who knows me, knows all those factors, and could give me really clear guidance and suggestions. So I have benefited tremendously from mentors. I also have felt really strongly, and again, it's been a maturing understanding over time about being a mentor. I have had the opportunity to teach both at Brown and at Harvard, and the delight in having people come away with better skills or information to go forth and do what they want to do is very similar between mentoring and teaching. And because we were a small team at Clarendon in the early days of similarly situated women who were either early stage career or wanting to remain professionally active and making a difference while also wanting to prioritize kids, that stage of mentorship meant a lot to me. And the opportunity of working with people, male and female, at Harvard, who had the aspiration to do roles like my own, was really important to me too. So mentorship is a legacy dimension that I think about a lot.
Christine, I realize there's probably someone on the call could be at any stage in his or her career who's like, well, how do you get these fabulous mentors? And I'm thinking about my own life. If my children ask that of me, what I would say, because I do look to different points in my life and say, oh, this person was pivotal. But if, say, they don't in their work situation at the moment have someone that is fulfilling that role, what advice do you give people who are looking for a trusted advisor like those people who you've talked about?
Well, I think let's separate those that you encounter at work and those you encounter elsewhere. I would say that the single biggest path to learning from a mentor in a professional context is working for or alongside someone who has a lot to teach you. And so I do think it is very easy for a young person, any stage career really, to think more about where you're going to work or what they're going to pay you or what you're going to do than who you're going to work for. I think especially earlier in your career, who you are going to work for and the prospect of what you have to learn from them is a huge, huge factor. And that has been a difference maker for me. But if you are in a situation, and we've all been in a situation where you have a supervisor or boss who you don't feel you can learn a lot from or not the right things, then sort of looking left and looking right and saying, who do I think I can learn from, inside or outside the workplace, and being open to asking someone whether or not you can watch them do this thing, understand how they made a decision. I stepped out of my role at Clarendon for 3 or 4 months in 2008 to work on Hillary Clinton's campaign in Rhode Island, and I had a student at the time at Brown who said, "Can I just come to headquarters and just watch you? Can I just see what you do?" And I would have never thought, hey, does anyone want to come watch what it looks like to be a press secretary on a presidential campaign for a state that's all of a sudden in play? But in this case, I was like, sure. And this student of mine, her name was Christine Heenan, came and absorbed a lot. And then it would be like, hey, can you do this? And ended up, having pivotal roles as a volunteer, or could convey information, having heard a series of conversations all day, chaotic, difficult, conflict-filled, presidential campaigns are crazy. But just having asked, she asked and had that opportunity that resulted. So I think not being afraid to ask someone you think you can learn from, or who is in a position you think you can learn from, is a really good route to mentorship.
Before we leave the Clintons and the White House, I'm sure there are people watching who want to hear more about that. Do you have a story, or would you like to talk about the duties that you had as a senior policy analyst and speechwriter for the White House?
Sure. So I worked primarily on healthcare reform and women's issues. And like in any job, there's always that other duties as assigned. You've got to show this delegation of nurses from Arkansas over to this thing, or you've got to meet with these people. So in the first year and a bit that I was there, it was really around working with my boss, Ira Magaziner, others on the Domestic Policy Council staff on crafting the healthcare plan that the Clintons would put forward. It was late in that stage that I shifted to a communications role and doing more speech writing, and then traveling a lot with the president when he traveled. The first lady was sort of her own policy person. She was that intimate, but when the president needed someone who was a messaging person, but who understood and could answer his questions on policy, I was that like middle bowl of porridge. I was sort of part policy, part communications. And that was an extraordinary experience. And actually, I think if you said what period of time or role was really the crucible for your career formation, I think sitting in that gulf and saying, here's a place full of brilliant policy people who know how to talk to each other, but not necessarily the American public. Here are these brilliant communicators who elected someone president, but can't answer a second order question that would really make a difference for someone. There is a space there to sort of be a dual passport holder and really care about and understand policy and understand communications and communication strategy and how to reach people. And I think that was the signature of Clarendon Group. I think it still is under other leadership. And that has been the biggest pathway of my career along with strategy.
That's fantastic. I imagine you learned what nimble meant too.
Yes.
You hear that word a lot, and
very much so.
Yeah. So in your current role as Chief Communications Officer at Flagship Pioneering, you're overseeing communications, external affairs, branding, marketing, advising dozens of Flagship founded organizations, and working at this intersection of human health and sustainability, two of the things that are really many of us are preoccupied with. How are you advising these life sciences companies to effectively communicate complex scientific information, concepts, and products to the consumers, the media, and other audiences? Because a lot of the people in communications, like my education on a parallel track to yours, I was an English major, you were in journalism. You're dealing with hard science, hard, complicated science, and I'm wondering what you can tell those people maybe in communications who might be on the webinar today, how you do that so well.
So I do think every career has its element of superpower, right? People who can move some dials and pull something and make an airplane go up in the air. That's a superpower. Like, that is amazing. People who can put out a fire and save people. Communications, to me, making the complex clear and accessible is the superpower of communications. It is the alchemy, and having it move people to want to do something or do something differently or think about something differently. And that is, to me, it's always been motivating to me in my career. In this instance, it's really interesting in two ways. One, having to learn the content that you don't have coming into the job to know how to best bring your skill set to communicating it. I did not come in with a science background. I did not come in with a investment or public company background. I had no experience taking companies public, dealing with investors or limited partners, or doing science. So lots and lots and lots to learn in taking this job. I do think if you have the skills to communicate well, you have learned to interview well, like you're doing now. So the ability to say, when you say that, how would that affect someone's cancer? Or how would that work in this instance? And when you say cytokine, that's this, right? And learning what you can, along with generous teachers, so as to know how to communicate. So that is a a big part of what my team does here. And also really important in leadership, knowing what you don't know, hiring to your own weaknesses. Say, okay, this I'm good at. I need someone who's a science writer. I need someone who knows how to deal with firms who deal with investors, those sorts of things. So I am good at delegating and good at hiring to my weaknesses, and I have certainly many. I would say the other interesting aspect of biotech for people who are not in the field is the single biggest rate limiting factor for biotech companies right now is not their ability to attract investment. It's not their ability for consumers to believe that new medicines might make a difference. It's a hiring. The war for talent in this industry is incredible. So some of the most important communicating we need to do is the value proposition of us as an employer. And so the same things you do to convey momentum and that you work with incredible people and what the potential of the science is that remains the same, whether it's a consumer audience or a media audience, but really saying, what is it like to work here and how do we show people why they should want to work here over the 10 other recruiters in their inbox trying to get them to come to this or that biotech company. So that's been a really interesting, I mean, everywhere I've worked, certainly Harvard, understanding how to communicate with faculty, with students, with internal constituencies is important. But this is the first role where attracting talent is a big part, a central part of our communications program.
Mm-hmm. Okay, shifting gears a little bit to leadership. Sure. You have been a leader from very early in your career. You possess the entrepreneur. I mean, I first interviewed you. We were talking about this before in 2000, I think 8 or 9, and you were the founder of Clarendon Communications. What was missing in the marketplace that started you, that prompted you to start your business? And would you talk a little bit about the feelings that you had around launching a business and how you managed? Because I imagine you had myriad feelings as you were doing this. You also are a mom, and you were a young mom at the time. So things that maybe other people would, or situations that would prompt other people to defer their dream. You didn't do that.
So it's really such an interesting question, what was missing in the marketplace, because I was working at Brown, and I think then, COVID is a whole different remote work, that we're in a whole new world. But at the time, I'm not sure there were many more flexible employers than universities, than higher education. And I had gone from a 5-day-a-week schedule at Brown till after I had my first son. Then I was, I'm sure many people on this call were the 4-day-a-week employee where you were being paid 80% time. But of course, if there was a call scheduled for a Friday, you were still doing it, or a meeting that was a must-have and game day meeting, and you went. Mm-hmm. So I was an 80% employee after I had Alex. And then when I had my second son, I went to a 5-morning-a-week schedule, really built around my dropping my older son off at Montessori and being done in time to pick him up. And two things. One, knowing yourself and knowing your own professional proclivities. It was my pediatrician who, when I was telling him what my arrangement was, he said, "So you'll be the one picking up Alex?" I said, "Yeah, or the nanny that I have for Colin in the mornings." And he just looked at me and I was like, "What?" And he said, "If it's not you on the hook for that pickup, I'm just telling you that 12:30 is going to become 2 o'clock really easily most days, and if you're trying to do halftime." And I was like, what a good point. And so I really organized myself. And some of my best memories of my son at that age were picking him up at this little Montessori school, going to this bakery next door, and he'd get his little mini size carrot cake cupcake, and I'd have my spinach pie for lunch, and then we'd go home. And at some point I was like, this is as flexible as it gets working for someone else. This is as good as it gets. Mm-hmm. And yet I want more flexibility, but I want to work, And so I went to Brown. I was working closely with a medical school at the time as well, given my healthcare background. And I said, I really want to keep doing this work. I need to do it more flexibly. Would you consider allowing me to be a consultant? And the problem I was solving for at the time was not like, I'm going to build this firm and this is our differentiated offerings and it was really, I want to work more flexibly, but can't do so without an income. So I've got to argue it in this way. I think working for our Magaziner's company when I first was out of school, working for a small business that had clients working for a consulting firm, a professional services firm, I had some muscle memory of how to structure engagements, how to bill, how to present to clients. So that was what was missing, the level of flexibility that I needed at the time. I think about it and I think, 2 or 3 years later into Clarendon, I had a few employees. My sons were both summer swimmers, and they swam for these little summer swim team that had meets on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. And you could put me on a phone at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night. I could do a Saturday meeting, but my Tuesday and Thursday mornings were really important to me. Mm-hmm. And so when you work for yourself, it's very hard to take 2 weeks and go to the Amalfi Coast. It's really easy to find 3 hours of 2 days of the week that you want to be sacrosanct. And so that was the role that it filled at the time. And I was able to, recruit first my next door neighbor, who became really the partner for me in building Clarendon, Stacey Paterno, now a leader herself. She leads the Rhode Island Medical Society now. It was just a great chapter. It was a great chapter.
Mm-hmm. I love how we kind of keep circling this protect the asset too, that you mentioned earlier with, you knew both what your priorities were as a professional person, but also as a parent. Those you seem to, even in young motherhood, when some of us were, trying to figure out just how to manage, that you had already a prescience about these experiences with your son having a cupcake and a spinach pie together were as important as anything else that you were doing. I love that story.
But I think that particular story, I really credit Dr. Griffith for knowing me, that I was going to be someone who never really worked 80% time and was going to say, oh, I can just finish up this email because Alex is getting picked up, and figuring out how you know yourself well enough to say these things are important to me, but I know myself as a worker and I'm going to be engaged and want to be high RPM on that piece as well. So how do I structure things that keep that in balance or put that in balance?
Mm-hmm. Staying with Clarendon for a minute, I went to the website and I looked at the leadership, the messaging around the leadership, and I loved quote that this is a group of optimists, experts, talented creators, and strategic thinkers who believe in the power of connected people and ideas, end quote. It's also an entirely female team. Would you talk about the building of your team and the strategy that you had behind that?
Yeah, sure. So it really was built in a way that was opportunistic and episodic and not strategy per se. My next door neighbor, we shared a driveway, had made a decision after having her second child to postpone her return to banking. She then had her third child in short order after that. And so it was just going to take a few years to figure it out, but had already had as a young person, an interesting career in banking, had gone to Providence College. And I got recruited to do a project for PC. And I said, Stacey, you worked for PC. Maybe you want to help me with this. And she killed it. She did a great job and could do so, around the demands of being a mother of 3 under 4. And I was introduced to another woman who had moved back from San Francisco. She was lobbying at the General Assembly, interesting women's health background, had just had her first child, wanted to keep working, wanted to do so flexibly. Another colleague I'd worked with in DC, Julie Andrews, similar situation. So it really came together around, as you said earlier, that missing opportunity in the marketplace. But from there, I would say by 2005, 6, 7 at Clarendon, we were hiring. I mean, we were never men need not apply. It just started in that particular way. Mm-hmm. And then the young assistants that we were hiring turned out to be women. So we sort of had very young, early career women, and then these moms. But then we had some great, Rhodes Anderson, we had Jeremy Giller, we had great men who were on our team as well. But the women who are leading the firm now, Joy Fox and Meg Gagan, have an incredible incredible background. Joy just announced she may consider a run for Congress in the 2nd District. Talk about brave women's leadership. Meg has worked in state government, federal government, as has Joy. So I think we have found a special niche in that connectedness that you described, the ability to make connections across our clients and with each other and across our networks. And it has always been a very welcoming, flexible place for women who tend to value that at a certain stage of their career. You know, Meg is a young mom. That was a big factor for her in leaving a job at the state, was what kind of flexibility could we afford?
Okay. Before we leave leadership, I don't know who said it, but I remember a quote that's always stuck with me is that courage is being afraid, but acting anyway. And I just look at your career and the different things that you've done and things that we've already talked about, so I won't revisit them. But the University of Rhode Island has leadership programs. They have leadership opportunities built into every major. If you're a person a little bit older for whom leadership education formally in a college or university was not part of your education, how do you advise people to try to develop leadership skills from the place they are?
So first of all, I would just say leadership at what it takes to succeed as a leader now looks so different than it did 20 years ago. I mean, and communications has never been more important as a component for a leader to possess and as a professional in advising leaders. You know, you could have been the CEO of a, you know, multinational manufacturer in the 1970s, and most people who've worked for you may not know what you look like, let alone you don't need to have a Twitter account or an annual letter or to show up at, you know, Davos and make a compelling speech. So the importance now, the expectations that people's leaders, the leader of your company, the leader of your organization, nonprofit, for-profit, government, is sharing our plan on whatever is coming, our views as an institution on what's happening in the world, whether it's the murder of George Floyd or what's happening in, you know, with January 6th, or a corporate voice or an institutional leadership voice on that was not expected in previous times, and it is expected now. So I think someone who's mid or late career stage thinking about a leadership role should not underestimate what's going to be expected of them as a signal setter and a culture carrier and a communicator as a leader. That is table stakes now. It did not used to be. It's a real requirement. And I think there's such a cacophony of voices and directions and information that people really need to understand a clearly articulated vision. Where is it you're taking this organization? What is my role in helping us get there? That is more important than it ever was.
That's a nice segue into an audience question that we have, which is, how do you gain the trust of clients and companies who are seeking communications guidance nowadays, especially when you talked about that cacophony that's just ever present now?
I think competence, if you're in front of a client, you should assume that you've been referred to them or they've heard that they're going to assume you're competent. The question is, do you understand their particular need in their particular situation? And to me, one of the biggest leadership qualities is very present in that moment, which is listening. I want to really listen to what your situation is, understand the context or unique proclivities of what your organization is facing and what it's trying to do or trying to manage. And I'm going to communicate back to you that understanding that I've heard, alongside some ideas, what a colleague of mine says is a confident thought. Here is my confident thought about where you might head, you know, and that says, okay, this is a person who does hear our situation. They're not coming in and today it's 3M and tomorrow it's the Rockefeller Foundation and, you know, Thursday it's American Airlines. This is about me, my situation, my organization. And they were listening enough to demonstrate that they know it's about me and to share some thinking about how they might help us. That, to me, there are a lot of firms that would put tremendous energy into very fancy PowerPoint decks and, you know, 17 client testimonials. I think listening and saying, we hear your situation or your opportunity or your problem, we think we can help, and here's some ideas of how we might begin doing so. beats that PowerPoint every time.
Mm-hmm. And the preface of confident thought. I love that phrasing. That's
Kath Connolly, confident thought. I love that phrase too.
fantastic. Shifting again to philanthropy. I'd love to hear about your kind of personal philosophy on philanthropy. And then an audience member said you've worked with some amazing female philanthropists. And what are some of the ways that women approach giving that makes them unique?
That's a great question. And I can just start with the Gateses, but also Steve and Connie Ballmer, who I worked with for a number of years. And in both cases, they were husband and wife duos giving away tremendous wealth with very different approaches. And you know, I'll give you an example of where listening, and that's the female philanthropists are really good about getting on the ground and talking to people and listening. Data, of course, matters. This is an example of a nutrient-rich rice that was pioneered and introduced into the Indian marketplace as a way to help with nutritional issues in India. And it just wasn't having the uptake that people thought. And Melinda, on one of her visits, pretty sure I've got the story right, was talking to these women in a village and said, but it doesn't taste good. It doesn't taste right. And, you can make nutrient-rich rice all you want. If it's not what they want to serve their family, if it's not what and like that, the combination of, for all the science and genetic engineering that made this rice such a great possibility for battling malnutrition, no one talked to the people who are going to cook it and serve it and say, what do you think about this? Would this go onto your dining room table? The way that Minute Rice would do a focus group, right? If they were introducing a new rice in a developed world. And so that, I think women, again, I'm going to circle back to listening. Women philanthropists are really good listeners. And they're, in my experience, they're also really want to make sure that the attention goes to the work as opposed to the people funding the work. When I was working for Steve and Connie Ballmer, Connie was just, because of just an insistence that they are regular people who happen to do well, not special people because of what their bank balance showed. Why would we put out a press release? Why would we have a website? And, it came to the point where for certain organizations they were funding, it was a huge credentialer for those organizations that Steve and Connie, College Crusade being an example, that Steve and Connie were giving them money. And so that was how we inched toward it's important for us to talk about this because it helps the work. But that was the bar. Not does it make us look good or have us on the cover of, the Forbes philanthropy issue. It helps the work. And in general, when you're not credit seeking, when you're about the impact you're making, the work tends to go farther.
Thank you. So we are 10 minutes already away. This has gone so quickly, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about you sit on URI's Board of Trustees, the university's governing body, and what do you see as the most significant opportunities that we face as a university, and the biggest challenges as we enter year 3 of the pandemic?
So let me start with the pandemic because that presents particular challenges and opportunities, and then speak to your broader question about opportunity more holistically. The pandemic has challenged every kind of institution. What does it mean to go to school? What does it mean to work? How do I feel connected to people I'm not seeing? The resulting mental health crisis that certainly colleges and universities have been on the front lines of. It's a really hard time to be a student. It's really a hard time to try to teach students and connect with them. And it's really a hard time to lead institutions. URI, I think, has been extraordinarily flexible and nimble. You use the word nimble in its response to the pandemic, such that it is one of a very small handful of schools that's seeing a growth in applicants and a growth in matriculants. URI is gaining in popularity and competitiveness at a time that lots of universities are really suffering a setback and a loss as a result of the pandemic. And that has to do with being nimble, with being a community that can step in and say, what are the needs? How do we help? How do we figure out the housing situation? How do we de-densify dorms, but still have people on campus? How do we work with our surrounding communities? So I think URI has fared much better than most and will continue to do so through challenges of the pandemic. It's also an area where when you have a nursing school, when you have a pharmacy school, your ability to see how these kinds of careers connect directly to people's lives, make a real difference in people's lives, I think will drive an interest in those majors and they're both areas of growth. As far as the broader opportunity for URI, this for me is an area where I've learned a lot being on the URI board, and that is for any university, the biggest strategic question. I remember being at a retreat of the deans at Harvard, and Michael Porter, the business strategist who was at Harvard Business School, his question of the deans was, how does you being at Harvard and being a group give you an unfair advantage over other business schools, over other education schools, over other law schools? And I think, what about being at the University of Rhode Island teaching oceanography, teaching engineering, gives you an unfair advantage in that there's an alchemy of what comes together that is a competitive advantage. And for me, learning about the blue economy potential in Rhode Island and URI's ability to situate itself as the intellectual and research engine and epicenter of driving those efforts is just so exciting to me. The more I learn about it, the more excited I am to figure out how we at the board can help drive that vision for URI and for the state. It encompasses ocean health, human health, fisheries and marine research. There's just so much about wind energy, solar energy, how the ocean piece fits into all that puzzle. URI is as well situated, I think, as any institution in the country to figure that out and bring a huge economic development pull along with it.
Mm-hmm. I agree that in my time working at URI, my respect and awe has grown exponentially for all that URI is doing in so many areas that are really essential in terms of our future health. So this is kind of a choose your own adventure question that I ask. Yes, I ask everyone that I interview. What didn't I ask you about that you feel it's important that people know about you, your work, your leadership style? You take it in any direction you want.
I would say, what didn't you ask me about? I guess, I have, as I've gotten to this stage of my career, thought a lot about professional bravery. What does it look like to be brave? So I guess one way of thinking about that is what makes you afraid in your job, what makes you afraid in your work. I think having known the flexibility and autonomy of working for myself sometimes makes me afraid to think what it's going to look like to work for someone else. And so really doing my due diligence about taking a role where I'm going to work for someone and want to work hard for them and be inspired by them. Also, the older you get, it's easy to assume what you're going to know, and your career is supposed to be applying that knowledge, not gaining new knowledge. So it was really frightening to think, I don't know why these people think I can come lead communications at this place where I don't do what they do. I don't know what they do. I don't know, and saying, well, they seem to think you can learn it, so maybe you can learn it. I think one of the biggest learnings for me of the last year is it's not, you can continue to get totally new content areas, and it's actually great for your brain to do so while bringing your domain expertise. So I had a colleague, he was the dean of Harvard Kennedy School, David Elwood, when I took the role at the Gates Foundation. And he said, oh my gosh, travel to Seattle and Bill Gates is supposed to be tough. And are you afraid? And I said, yeah, but I really want to learn global development. And he said, well, the advice I got that I'm really good about keeping is you should do something once a decade that scares the hell out of you. And I was like, okay, well, this is it for my 40s. This is what I'm doing. And so when this opportunity where I am now came up, I was like, okay, so this is my 50s. This is what I'm going to do that's going to scare the hell out of me. And it's never, at the end of the day, you have scary moments. Beginnings are, being at the base of a mountain is always scarier than once you start climbing. And so I guess that's what my adventure would be. Don't be afraid at the base of the mountain, start climbing, you're going to get there.
I love it. So I've been writing things down, which isn't the best thing to do in a webinar because I'm looking down, but I protect the asset, confident thought, once a decade. We know that people's attention spans have taken a hit with the rise in technology. So I've read that we have an attention span that lasts a second less than that of a goldfish. So it's like 7 seconds versus 6. I think this is, it is to your point earlier about the cacophony, the noise, the number of things coming at us, the work we have to do to be informed citizens these days, reading more and reading more diversely. Given all of that, what one thing would you have us remember from our talk today? What one thing would you want people to commit to memory or walk away from in terms of what, the lessons of your life and leadership, or really, I love that idea that you just talked about, professional courage. So I'm curious about, if you could plant one thing in our heads, what would that be?
Well, first, I just want to identify with the challenge that you described, which is paying attention for more than 15 seconds to anything. I bet many of the people on this webinar would do what we would do if we weren't fully participant, which is just check your email once in a while, or you're also still eating, or we are just so, and COVID has accelerated this, attuned to multitasking, that the ability to do one thing and focus on one thing sounds so easy, and it's not. It's gotten really, really hard. So I really identify with that. Other than, Ted Lasso's advice to those on the pitch, being a goldfish is not always a good idea. So doing those things that allow you to focus on one thing, being out in nature, reading, to start your day before you turn to Twitter, reading 5 pages of a book. That's what I'm trying this year. Those are really good. What I would say to take away is that notion of protecting the asset, that understanding your strength, joy, vibrancy, ability to take things on helps many people. Those you mentor, those that you raise, those that you're married to, those that rely on you for friendship or counsel advice. And secondly, I do think just assuming that all those things, difficult conversations, professional courage, starting up the mountain, are not as hard as you think, and practice will reinforce that.
Thank you.
Thank you. You asked such incredible questions.
Well, it was my honor.
Thanks a lot.
I'm just going to jump in quickly here. We don't have much time, but we do hopefully can fit in 2 quick questions that just came in. One, Christine, how do you stay connected to your past mentors and bosses?
Well, first of all, it has never been easier to stay connected because of the ability to shoot someone a text, stay friends with them on social media, etc. I stay connected to all of my former mentors, and I have previous stages of my life and career before I had those tools where I was terrible at staying in touch. So that has felt important, and largely it's through shared interest. Read this and thought about you, trying to get together at least once a week. I mean, if you say, if I was back a year from now, I'd want you to all hold me to seeing Carol Rasko in this calendar year. My boss at the White House, we just correspond. We haven't seen each other, and I would love to do so. That's my answer.
Great. Okay, we've got, I'm going to throw this last quick one in because I'm sure people will love to hear this. With so much news out there and so many news organizations, what is your daily news diet? How do you really manage all that?
I do start with Twitter. It is the world's newsroom. And I follow a lot of journalists. I follow a lot of people in my sector, and then other things that interest me. And it's just the most efficient way to get a scan of what's happening across many things quickly. I'm not a TV news person, generally speaking. I do, I get 3 newspapers a day at work. There are days that I can read them over coffee in the morning. There are days that get tucked in my bag when I leave at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, but I still try not to put my head on a pillow without seeing what the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or Boston Globe prioritize that day. Those are my main sources of news.
Great. Excellent. I'm sure people can take those answers away with them and incorporate them into their routine. So we are right at 1 o'clock. So I want to thank Christine and Mary Beth again. This has been incredibly inspiring. I have learned so much, and I'm sure our audience very much has too. We really are fortunate to have both of you as part of the URI community. And to all of our attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us. And please keep an eye out for future programs from the Women in Leadership Speaker Series. In the next couple of days, you will receive a brief survey about the program. And if you could take the time to share your thoughts, that would be great. It helps us as we form more programs for Women in Leadership Speaker Series. Thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.